Good evening and welcome to tonight's meeting of the City of Tucson Planning Commission. My name is Chris Ortiz-Pino and I am the chair of the Planning Commission. The responsibilities of this body are to advise the mayor and council and the Planning and Development Services Department on the adoption of long-range plans, policies, specific plans, and regulations that affect land use and development. Will staff please call the roll?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Chair Ortiz-Pino.
Present.
Vice Chair Kinney.
Present.
Commissioner Lampo.
Here.
Commissioner Lane.
Present.
Commissioner McCansey.
Present. Present.
Commissioner Schwartz.
I'm here.
Commissioner Small.
Present.
Commissioner Walzak.
Commissioner Walzak, present.
Commissioner Willett.
Present.
Commissioner Young.
Here.
And Commissioner Zigier.
Commissioner Zigier is present.
Thank you. Let the record reflect that a quorum is in fact present.
Excellent. Thank you, Carver. I'd like to now call for the next item, number 2, approval of legal action report from February 5th, 2025.
Chair Ortiz-Pino, I'll go ahead and make a motion to approve the legal action report.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
All right, excellent. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of approving legal action report from February 5th, 2025, please say aye.
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 Aye. All those opposed say nay. Hearing none, motion is approved. Moving right along to item number 3, let's get started with the Community Corridors Tool Unified Development Code Amendment and public hearing. Would staff please provide their presentation?
Excellent. Thank you, Chair Ortiz-Pino and Commission. So this is item number 3. Second. Yeah, it's fine. So this is item number 3. This is the Community Corridors Tool and EV Charging Unified Development Code Amendment. This is citywide and this is a public hearing. Hold on one second. There we go. This item, which we've had a couple study sessions with the commission on and been working on for almost actually a little over 2 years at this point, has pretty simple goals. It is to make infill development, especially affordable housing, easier to build along our corridors. It's looking at removing of barriers for both attainable and affordable housing. It looks to really promote transit-oriented and pedestrian-oriented development that supports our climate action goals. It has goals to update our zoning code to make it easier to permit a full spectrum of housing types in the city of Tucson. So not just the single-family homes in the really large development, but those in between. And then really simplify the redevelopment of underutilized and vacant sites, as well as vacant parking lots, unused parking lots, and declining commercial areas. So this comes from quite a bit of direction from mayor and council over the last couple of years. Really starting back in February 22nd, 2023, we held a study session on recommendations from the Commission on Equitable Housing and Development. They had recommendations to look at regulatory barriers to affordable housing in the city of Tucson and figure out ways through our zoning code to encourage and incentivize affordable housing. We had a second study session on April 18th, 2023. This was looking at tools for redevelopment of underutilized sites. This is really the bulk of what you have in front of you. There was a study session looking at how do we take our parking lots, how do we take our declining commercial areas and really spur redevelopment along them. We had a third one on August 8th, 2023. That was a study session on tiny homes and building and zoning codes related to them. It really looked at the wide spectrum of tiny homes. So looking at everything from the shelter care uses to tiny homes on wheels to small houses and where there were barriers and where they were allowed within our codes. We kind of pulled all of that together, did some initial analysis, and then held a study session on August 17th, 2023. That was really, we developed a work plan based off that analysis. Mayor and council told us to move forward with that, and we entered kind of phase 2. At that point, we really went in to really understand what those barriers were. We did a whole bunch of opportunity site analyses that included economic analysis related to that, which informed our initial recommendations, which we brought back to Mayor and Council on September 11th, which were also based on some initial kind of public outreach in August, and then a proposal ultimately in October 2024 when we briefed Mayor and Council. So there's really two big portions of this. The first one of that is really, it's housing, and then it's also looking at the type of development that we have in the city of Tucson. And the first one related to housing, this is just kind of showing why this is so important and why this is really central to what we're doing. On the left-hand side here, really, we did a housing needs assessment related to state requirement from Eco Northwest, and we looked at housing need in the city of Tucson. As of now, the current housing need is over 8,000 units, according to that study. The one on the left here shows when you start to look out 10 years, looking at over 35,000 units related to that. So showing really the amount of housing need that we really have in the city of Tucson. When you start to kind of break that down, what was kind of interesting about this is that they started to look at different income levels within and where that's broken down. So on the left-hand side here, you have it's 0 to 30% area median income. Oh, one thing I did want to mention, I apologize. Commissioners, we did post this presentation online. I know last time it was hard to see things. So if you go online to the materials, there is a PDF of this. So anyways, sorry, I forgot about that. So on the left-hand side, we have about 2/3 of it within 0 to 30 area median income or 30 to 60% area median income. This is what is generally subsidized affordable housing. And it's a huge number. I mean, it's looking at, over 20,000 units that we'll need to produce related to that. Almost all of the remaining future need going forward is really within the 120% AMI or higher, and that's market rate housing. What this does is really show you kind of where the needs are as we move forward. What's interesting about that 120% AMI, which is market rate or higher, is the fact that we're kind of seeing this currently where we get a lot of in-migration of people who may have more purchasing power than a lot of the people here, or may have higher wages. And if they don't have the actual housing that meets their income level, they end up purchasing up things that normally would be available to those middle areas, which is really the 80% AMI to 120% AMI. And so it really shows the need as we move forward to make sure that we are producing enough housing to support either the in-migration or the needs of our community, or else it affects the overall housing affordability for the whole city. And we're really seeing a lot of the impacts of that right now. What we're seeing as well is just that there are a lot of barriers to this type of development that we need. And so we did that analysis to understand those barriers. And the main ones that we're seeing are things like parking requirements. Too high parking requirements, it reduces the efficiency of the site. It also increases cost, and it leads to increases in stormwater runoff, increases in urban heat island effect for that. Additionally, height maximums. Could someone please mute themselves? So height maximums is a big barrier. So what we found with our analysis is that there's a sweet spot for development. It's really between 4 and 6 stories. And if you look at our current zoning code, most of our zones commercial zones, office zones don't really allow for you to get to that 4 stories. You look at our C1 zone, which is really our most prominent zone along our corridors, and it allows for 30 feet. It was originally intended to be 3 stories. But with modern building practices, it's really, really challenging to get 3 stories. In fact, you really can't get 3 stories within 30 feet. Our C2 zone, which is 40 feet, it was intended to be 4 stories. Again, because of modern building practice, where you really need 12 feet per story at least, you really can't fit 4 stories within that. So when we started to look at it, we have this economic analysis telling us that you need 4 stories, yet almost nowhere in the city can you actually develop at 4 stories. Very few places. Density requirements are restrictive in a couple ways. One is that if they're too low, you can't get enough units on the site. A lot of times also, if they're too low, you end up with larger units than you need. Developer comes in, wants to maximize what they can do, and you end up with 3 and 4 bedroom units versus something that's actually reflective of the market or reflective of the community. So something like a mix of studios, 1s, 2s, and 3s. Split zoning is an issue along our corridors. At one point, there were these residential strips of zoning that were behind the commercial areas. It was originally, they were allowed to do some ancillary uses related to the commercial portion. About 30 years ago, we removed that ability to do so. So now there's these residential zoned portions that really have no use, and it's really and make it really challenging to redevelop those commercial zones. And then discretionary processes, they can lead to uncertainty in the process. These are things like having to go through a rezoning process. And it can also lead to increased cost, increased time. A lot of times they can take 6 months to a year in order to get those approvals before you're even able to kind of move forward with the whole permitting process. We do want to just mention this, and we did, as we move forward with this, is that, zoning is only one part of the problem right now as far as what we're getting as far as housing development. There are a lot of other challenges right now. So just development cost of labor, cost of land, cost of money because of high interest rates are all big challenges to make a project work. If you don't have the zoning in place, you don't get anything. You won't get anything. But there are other challenges as well. So at the very least, we can loosen up the zoning code to where it matches what the market will produce or what is feasible. And that's what we're really trying to do here. There are some areas where we have flexibility within our code that we are seeing some production of multifamily housing and residential housing. And those really are things like our planned area development, downtown infill incentive district, urban overlay districts, even our individual parking plan for that. Now, so this chart's actually kind of interesting because it shows the multifamily development that we had in the city over the last 10 years. And in that central portion, you'll see 56% of the multifamily development occurred in our infill incentive district and our urban overlay districts. So it's less than 5% of the area of the city. So you're seeing all of the multifamily development occur within those tools, which are urban tools that allow for additional height, allow for that flexibility that we're really looking at here. The other 44% on there is kind of interesting as well, because if you look at those big purple dots, at least four of those are planned area developments. So you have things like the landing that's at Irvington and 919, you have the bridges, you have the Benedictine, all of those are planned area developments, which allow for that flexibility to be able to actually, get the height you need, get the reduction of potential parking or setbacks that you need for those. What this really tells us is just that our zoning code isn't working as it is to develop the type of housing we need. The final thing I want to point out here is just the fact that it's I should put my glasses on, but the total over the 10 years was 5,367 units. And if you think back to those numbers that we need over 10 years, which is 35,000 plus units, it just shows that we're not producing at the level that we need in order to really meet our need as we move forward. And so the other part of this beyond the housing portion, and the housing portion is very, very important, is just the fact that we have had planning documents and visions for kind of the type of development and the type of community we want in the city of Tucson that we've been developing and getting community feedback on for the last 10, 20 years. And so in the process of doing this, we went through and did a review of all of our policy documents, but also all of the feedback that came along with that. And one of the things that came really clear is when we started looking at plans like Plan Tucson, Move Tucson, Tucson Resilient Together, our climate action plan, housing affordability strategy for Tucson, a lot of these is is just the fact that there is this preference for transit-oriented, pedestrian-oriented development, infill development that is not being reflected in the development that we're getting from our zoning code. And there appears to be this mismatch of what our zoning code produces and what we want as a community. And so what our policy documents say is we want development such as this, mixes of uses with connected streets that make it easy and safe, buildings with active ground floors, wide sidewalks with trees, townhomes on a pedestrian street, things like this. And what we ultimately are getting from our zoning code is more of an auto-centric, auto-oriented development. Our zoning code was developed primarily, 60s, 70s, when we were developing as a suburban kind of community, and one that really relied heavily on the automobile. And there are remnants of that baked into our zoning code. And a lot of what we're seeing right now are things like car washes, drive-throughs, self-storage, but even the residential development that we're seeing are ones that are surrounded by a sea of parking that don't have that connectivity to the street and don't really speak to a lot of those policies that we've set out in our policy documents. And so what we're trying to do here is really create something that not only produces the housing we need as a community, but is something that really aligns those policies and ends up kind of shifting the development patterns that we have in the city of Tucson to one that really does reflect those policy documents. And so this is kind of just an overview of what the tool, how it's set out. It is an optional tool that can apply when you have a frontage along one of our city corridors that are zoned R1, R2, R3, any of our office zones, so O1, O2, O3, C1, C2, C3, and then our office commercial residential zones, OCR1 and OCR2. I want to note, and I'll do this on the next page a little bit, is that it's very limited in R1 and R2 as far as where they're applicable, but there are certain situations, like I talked about with those split zonings, where it is applicable. And they have more restrictive standards than some of the other zones. Permitted uses, the uses allowed by the underlying zone generally, but we have restricted auto-centric uses, as well as some of the other uses that aren't necessarily supportive of the community, such as smoke shops. But it does allow for additional housing types, such as townhomes, duplexes, tiny homes in those residential zones. Dimensional standards are adjusted to encourage more housing. Again, we're aligning it with those market studies that we did to make sure that it will support the production of housing and make sure that it's financially feasible. So it's usually 1 to 2 stories of building height. It's reduced parking or more flexible parking, I guess. It is some reduced setbacks. As well as removal of density calculations or requirements. There are some incentives in this for 3 things. One is for affordable housing. The second one is for if you have first floor commercial uses, you get an extra building height or building story for each of these, or if you preserve historic properties on site, you get an extra story. And then there's, ultimately just more flexibility in how how this works, as well as the requirement for a master plan for large sites, just understanding that as you get to a certain scale, sometimes things get done in pieces, and we didn't want this to be a situation where you piecemeal a site and it doesn't meet the intent of this code. So a master plan, when you have a site over 12 acres, they would have to come in and have a conceptual plan, as well as, and I'll talk a little bit about this, this was a change from last time, we are proposing a neighborhood meeting as well as review by their design review board.
Dan, apologies for the interruption. I'm just curious, what's the coding of the colors on the streets there?
Yeah, no, Commissioner Small, yeah, so on the left, that's our major streets and routes plan. So the coding is just the different classifications within that. Volume and then type. So it's either they're separated out by arterial or collector, but then also scenic, gateway, or just a normal arterial.
This
Thank you.
is Commissioner Zagier. You said neighborhood meeting, that's just for master plan development over 12 acres, correct?
Yes, Commissioner Zagier, yeah, that is correct.
Thank you.
Nope, there we go. Okay, good. Oh, no, went too far. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit more about just applicability. Again, this is an optional tool. It is on sites required frontage with the MSNR transportation corridor. And then really most of this applies to the R3 O zones, C zones, and OCR zones. The R1 and the R2 zone properties, this is, I just wanted to be really clear that you can use the tool only in these three situations. One, if it's sandwiched between two eligible zoned properties. So if you have an O3 parcel, and then you have an R2 parcel, and then you have a C1 parcel. We have this situation along a lot of our corridors where it's just been rezoned parcel by parcel over time, and there's just some remnant R residential portions in there. So that's one of the situations. If it's vacant as of the adoption of the code, you can utilize it for that. We did that to basically protect against speculative demolition and people going through demolishing and being like, hey, it's vacant and we can use the tool. And then the third one is a site with multiple zoning that includes high density residential, office, or commercial. So again, it's basically if you have in the front those commercial portions, and then you have that back portion that's R1 or R2, and it's a full site, it has internal circulation, et cetera, you can use it for that whole site. There are less, the standards for R1, R2, and R3. R1 only allows for 2 stories. R2 allows for 3 stories or 36 feet. I'll talk about it in a second. Do want to note sites with existing overlays, our historic preservation zones, our historic landmarks, urban overlay districts, neighborhood preservation zones, downtown infill incentive districts, any of our, Sunshine Mile overlay, and pads are not eligible to utilize the CCT. Those have been, had specific planning for them and were really related to specific situations and reactions to specific situations. So those are not eligible. Now work. Okay, so real quick, I just wanted to touch on height and building height. It's generally 1 to 2 stories for each of these. So when you look at something like either R2 or C1, which is what or R3 or C1 or in there, it would allow for up to 4 stories. So it gets you to that threshold to 4 to 6 stories. And the way we're looking at it instead, with this tool is really a max height and a max stories. And we know that because with modern building practices, you need more flexibility in building and story and floor to floor heights. Essentially, it's a lot of times first floor commercial needs up to like 16 feet. Then there's other situations where you really need at least 12 feet for those building stories. So we don't want someone to squish 5 stories into 50 feet. But we want to allow for that flexibility so they can actually have some design to make sure that it actually visually looks good and it works properly. And so what we end up with is really 4 stories or 50 feet for R3, O2, and C1. And it's reflective really of what the existing zone kind of allows for building height. And then 5 stories or 60 feet for O3 and C2. And again, it's really, those were intended to be 3 and 4 stories, and it's allowing for that 1 to 2 stories, et cetera, within those. There are transitions in form and scale that are required for this. So as we do allow for a little bit more building height. There are requirements to bring that building to the front of the parcel, to be along the arterial or collector, and then step down to the existing development behind there. So just wanted to kind of point out how that works, to where as you get taller, again, you kind of load that intensity away from the existing development that's there. This is kind of how that looks. We've done some site scenarios that show how it can transition to neighborhoods. But again, having that 2 to 4 story, two stories or so when you're close to the neighborhoods, and then 4 to 6 stories as you get closer to those arterials for that. One thing I do want to point out as well is just the fact that there are several additional things that you get with this. So we are allowing for the flexibility on those things that have been barriers. So we're looking at flexibility on parking, density, setbacks, along with building height. But in exchange for that, or not even just in exchange for that, there's a lot of other standards that we're requiring that are above and beyond what the underlying zoning would require. And a lot of those are related to the transit-oriented, pedestrian-oriented kind of nature of things, as well as shade. And so really what we're looking at here is that there are several things that we built into this that's based off of the community feedback that we've received, as well as all of those plans. Again, it's those transitions in form and scale to the lower density neighborhoods. It requires privacy mitigation. It right sizes parking requirements instead of having a set number for things, which allows for potentially less asphalt, as well as smaller parking lots that maybe not be needed. The goal here really is to create safe and walkable, comfortable streets, and create active and really usable public space. So there's a requirement in here for open space, 5 to 10%, depending on the size of the site. So smaller sites are 5%, larger sites would be up near 10%. There are requirements as well for wider sidewalks. So currently the requirement is 4 feet for our sidewalks. With our underlying zoning requirements here are 8 to 12 feet for the sidewalks. There's increased landscaping requirements, enhanced landscaping requirements when there's pedestrian areas, as well as that open space requirements, and their shade requirements. These are all things that are not required from our underlying zoning if you were to go through and redevelop with them. This is kind of just an example of some of those things that have come out of feedback that we've built into this. So one of the things we heard when we first went out to the public back in August was concern about encroachment into neighborhoods. We've been really careful about crafting a tool that stays along the corridors, right? So you have to have frontage along that corridor, and you can't encroach into areas that aren't already a part of that site. So you can't move back, you can't go through and selectively demolish, as I was talking about, and then encroach into it as well. So we have a date, depending on when the adoption might be, but a date that would actually say, as of adoption, it has to be vacant to have some adoption to basically utilize it for this. R1 and R2 applicability limited. We wanted to make sure the scale was appropriate. So again, 2 stories for R1, 3 stories for R2. It does have smaller lot sizes, but the goal there again is to transition that development as you move back towards those neighborhoods. Larger setbacks when you're adjacent to single family homes. We added in a privacy requirement between the last 2 study sessions. And then kind of just, again, I talked about the projections and encroachment. And then, between the last meeting and this meeting, we've added that neighborhood meeting and design review for those larger scale projects for this. I will eventually get there. I just wanted to touch really quickly on one thing. We talked about this last time, and I know there's been some concern that this doesn't necessarily help with affordable housing because there isn't a requirement for affordable housing. There's just an incentive. And, we've been working with housing and community development on, they're looking at the redevelopment of the Amazon Motel on Miracle Mile. And this just kind of shows how this could potentially work and help with both subsidized projects that we're working on in the city, but also there's these low-income housing tax credit projects, which are private affordable housing projects, and how it can really help with them. Left-hand side is just utilizing the base zoning that's out there. It's C2. It's actually a relatively intense commercial zone already with a little bit of MH1 in the back. The height limit right in C2 is 40 feet. So you would think you might be able to get to 4 stories, or at least the intent was that. But due to parking requirements and due to density requirements, you really can only do 2 stories on this site. So they could get an additional 30 units or so on this site if they were to redevelop it. With the CCT, because of the ability to go to 5 stories in the C2 instead of 40 feet, plus the affordable housing incentive, they could potentially get up to 6 stories on this site. And then reductions in parking, reductions in some of the other kind of other items and density, you can potentially get up to 94 new units. I think the actual proposal is around 80 or so units, just because that's what works. But this just kind of shows how making those changes can potentially impact our ability to produce subsidized affordable housing as well. So wanted to talk a little bit about some of the community engagement that we've held since our last meeting for this. So we've held a couple open houses, town halls, I guess, at both Ward 3 and Ward 6. Ward 3 meeting, I think there were like about maybe 40 or 50 people there. Ward 6 had about maybe around 30 people or so. Really great conversation, went through a presentation and just kind of answered questions. We've been going and presenting to boards and commissions. We've gone to neighborhood associations when requested. We have made website updates and we continue to do so. We did notify for this public hearing all the neighborhood associations. They've all had mailed notice. We tried to make it so it was less just kind of less of a legal ad and more of a kind of kind of instructive kind of educational document that's a little easier to understand. We've done a lot of email blasts. I apologize if people are getting a lot of that.
So many grifters and crooks with you, the American people.
And then we also released a video to try to help explain the community corridors tool about a week or 2 ago as well. Just trying to figure out, ways to communicate things that can be kind of complicated related to this. There we go. Okay, go back. So we've received quite a bit of feedback, and we continue to receive quite a bit of feedback related to this. There have been a handful of concerns, as well as there's been support for the project. Some of those concerns that we have heard are things like neighborhood notice. We did add in the neighborhood notice, as Commissioner Zagier said, for the master plan project, for that and for a design review board review. We're still there isn't neighborhood notice for the remaining portion of the tool. A lot of that's just because the underlying zoning doesn't currently have neighborhood notice either. For that, we want to make sure it is a balancing act, and we want to make sure it works for that. And we're just a little, for the tool, make sure that it is still feasible. It also adds to unpredictability a lot of times related to that. Second, limited applicability. There are concerns about its applicability along our arterials and collectors. So calls to either do it for specific corridors or potentially removing collectors from the applicability, or maybe just collectors at intersections. That's been something we've heard. Concerns just about building height and the impacts of building height. Its impacts of views, but also just kind of impacts of like privacy concerns and things of that sort that might come from that. Concerns about traffic and parking. We've heard about potential overflow parking into neighborhoods, as well as just overall increased traffic of cut through traffic and things of that sort that could potentially happen from development. Infrastructure capacity, we've heard some concerns about this, and the ability of our infrastructure to support new development. For that, we have, related to infrastructure capacity, there are requirements that when you bring in a new development, it gets reviewed by all the agencies, such as you have to go to Pima County Wastewater, or you have to go to TEP or what are the utilities in order to make sure there's capacity. If there isn't capacity, you have to actually make the investments in order to make sure there is capacity. Excluding certain uses. I know we've excluded a lot of uses in this that we feel are not supportive of the tool. I think we've heard a little bit about potentially hookah lounges and things of that sort. It's a little hard to separate that out from its entertainment use. And there are probably, especially like something like the redevelopment of Park Place Mall, there might be a need for entertainment uses because it's such a broad category. So it's a little challenging. City Attorney's Office is actually working on additional regulations for those. And we think that that's probably going to address that problem more directly. Architectural standards, we do have form standards in here. And you'll see there were actually additions of kind of graphics related to the facade standards that we've added in to provide a little more clarity. We're a little concerned, architectural standards tend to get into stuff that's more design review based. It's less predictable. It's been less predictable both for the community, but also for whoever's the property owner or the applicant is for that. Sunset date, there's been a request for a sunset date. We've heard, 5 years, 10 years potentially for that at some of those meetings. And then just kind of sustainability concerns overall, concerns about just kind of the impact on, stormwater runoff, potentially on urban heat island effect, things of that sort. We have had conversations with the U of A and Led Keith at the U of A, just about, kind of impacts of urban heat island effect. And in general, diverting development from the periphery is what really, has a significant impact on urban heat island effect. But on top of that, when you're going through and you're replacing a parking lot or a vacant lot with a development that has vegetation, has shade, in general, you're really improving your situation overall with that redevelopment. If you think about our standards in the 70s, we didn't have a lot of the vegetative requirements for our parking lots and things of that sort. If you think about some of our corridors where they're just commercial buildings with just like a sea of asphalt, even something like that, redeveloping and having to use our new development standards that we have, commercial rainwater harvesting, all of this other stuff, that alone is going to lead to a much better situation than you currently would have with the existing development that's there. We have heard some support for the community corridors tool. This is just kind of a sampling of some of the things that we've heard. Support on how it helps to address housing shortage issues, removes barriers to redevelopment of our commercial corridors. We've heard some support for a development that encourages walkable, climate adaptive communities, that it encourages housing variety and housing for mixed incomes, goals of supporting transit and city environmental goals. And there's been quite a bit of feedback related to just the encouragement of the reduction of parking and parking overall. Parking's a pretty popular thing that we hear from the community on this, on both sides, I will say. Getting there. So we did receive some feedback at our 2 previous study sessions. One of the big conversations was flexibility versus predictability. So we went through and we just kind of made some adjustments within that kind of later section that really talked about some of the flexibility that's built in. I do want to mention, just related to the flexibility and predictability, is that this really is modeled after existing processes that we currently have. So there is this need to have some flexibility just because every site is different. And so we currently have our technical standards modification requests and parking modification requests within our code that allow for kind of the reduction in certain cases of certain criteria, things within our technical standards and or parking reductions. The 20% that's in there is really reflective of that and very similar. I will say when, in here, it's pretty specific stuff that you have to meet for those criteria in order to do so, but it's really intended for when there's existing situations and existing conditions that are very challenging, and you would have to put in that request for that. So I think we clarified some of that language. We made sure that it's clear that you can't use it for things like building height, you can't use it for step backs, all of those things that we've built in there that really do benefit the community, but it does allow for some of that flexibility. It's also important. 20% sounds big, but when you think about something like maybe a 10-foot setback, it's really 2 feet. It's not a huge amount. It's just allow for that flexibility when you're close, essentially, to make something work. Scope of the master plan process. Again, we talked about this at the last meeting. There was also some feedback from some of the residents at Elcon. And, just the thinking about the scale of that development, having that neighborhood impact input and having that also neighborhood meetings really important when you start to get larger development and the impact that that could potentially have, as well as the design review to make sure that it really meets the intent of the code. Neighborhood notification. That was a big conversation at the last meeting on how, whether that can be incorporated or how it could potentially be incorporated. There was quite a bit that we talked about requirement to protect contributing historic resources. Actually related to that, we did do some mapping that was in your materials. I just wanted to kind of point this out. So what we have here, we went through and mapped contributing historic resources on our CCT eligible properties. When we did so, it's really it's pretty limited in its scope. There were 170 total structures that overlapped citywide for this. What you end up seeing is that it's mostly in things like the Miracle Mile historic districts and edges along Blenman Elm, Grant, and Speedway for that. So we have, and then on top of that, because we limited the applicability for local HPZs and historic landmarks, it really excluded most of the historic resources in the city. We do want to just mention the reason why we ended up with a incentive versus a kind of requirement here. Also, is just the fact that these are National Register historic districts. They're not locally designated historic districts. Locally designated historic districts have restrictions, have requirements. Generally, National Register historic districts are honorific, and they're usually use incentives in order to kind of protect them. That said, we did want to, kind of come back to you and present this to you as far as what the potential impacts could be. So the bigger areas that we have, this is Miracle Mile, the structures that are in kind of purple. I went through a lot of colors to try to figure out which ones would actually pop out. But because all the zones are different colors, it was a little challenging. So purple ones are the contributing structures. So this is Miracle Mile and Oracle. If you think about kind of where this is like along that stretch. And then the other kind of areas that where you start to see some clusters, and it's quite a few, are areas like Grant Road between Tucson and Country Club. You see that corner of Grant Road and Country Club, just off of Blemon and Elm. And then there's some contributing historic structures that are west of Tucson, along Speedway there. There are a few other areas as well, but again, pretty limited as far as where they're at. We did talk a bit about cool roofs. Again, I think that's because it's a building code item. We're really working on our Southwest Resilient Code Collaborative. That's something that we're looking at with that, and including for all of our zoning, all of our building codes. Talked a bit about allowance for alcoholic beverage service and office zones. I think this doesn't really affect the applicability of the overall tool. We were intending it to be a way to kind of have services or even just, you know, bars or restaurants nearby so people could walk to them. Limiting the applicability overall of the CCT, and kind of we've discussed that quite a bit. And then defining kind of the corridor through the MS&R plan and coordination with the Department of Transportation and Mobility. I did want to just kind of mention this. You know, we are coordinating with the Department of Transportation and Mobility on this. They are currently working on changes to the major streets and routes plan. We had a meeting with them about a week or two ago just to talk through what those changes might mean. Most of the corridor, almost all of the arterials and collectors in the city are either going to remain the same or they're generally going to become smaller as far as width goes. There are a few areas that are being removed, and there are a few collectors that are being added that are currently actually functioning as collectors. But there's very limited changes that are occurring. On top of that, we don't make changes to our major streets and routes plan that often. The last time there was a wholesale change to the major streets and routes plan was, I think, in the 80s. It's been a long time since we've done that. But we do have representatives from Department of Transportation and Mobility who are here, who are willing to answer any questions kind of related to that effort as well, if you'd like. I did want to talk about the applicability portion. You know, there have been comments related to just removal of collectors or potentially just doing collectors at intersections. There are very few applicable or eligible parcels along our collectors, and most of them do end up being at those intersections of collectors and arterials, or where you start to see the character change for that. So if you look on here, this has Pima and Glen are the collectors, as well as I think it's like Columbus and Rosemont. But you see those areas that are kind of in between the major arterials of those intersections really don't have applicable parcels. This is another example as well, kind of as you get a little further east. Those kind of items circled are those collectors, as you see, and a lot of parcels that are not eligible along those corridors. One thing I do want to also kind of point out, just related to collectors, and the reason why, you know, we have included collectors here is just because the scale is different. And that scale of being a smaller street is actually a really good thing when you're trying to create pedestrian-friendly places. So outside of downtown and 4th Avenue and maybe Main Gate, we don't have a lot of walkable places. Those are our opportunities to start to make those areas outside of the downtown area. And that's the reason why it is actually important to allow for some of this development along those corridors as we do this. Talked a little bit already about infrastructure concerns. I know we talked about it here. There was some conversations about traffic analysis. We made some kind of clarifications on that. That is a part of the process. So traffic analysis. There were some questions about the parking statement and the impact on neighborhoods. You know, I think we've tried to find a balance between what we've seen in a lot of communities where they've gone through and completely removed their parking standards versus something that you know is very prescriptive for that. And then there was a bit of conversation about the review at the end of the year. That's something we definitely want to do, looking at you know, a 1 to 2 year review, and then maybe doing that annually for this, just to make sure that it's working properly, to see if we need to make any tweaks, changes related to it. Okay, so we did make some code modifications since the last study session. I talked a little bit about some of this. Clarifications, just cleaned up text on certain portions. We added in graphics to help illustrate some of those requirements, especially the stuff related to form. The large scale development requirement, we talked about that, requiring the neighborhood meeting and then review by the design professional with specific findings to make sure that they know what they're looking for or looking at. And there's an option of a design professional to be added to that, as well as actually really any project. We made some changes to the affordable housing requirements. So we updated 511.7B3 to require it at the time of approval. But we also kind of tightened up that language that basically says that the compliance will be monitored by HCD on an ongoing basis to make sure that there aren't any loopholes, to make sure that we do actually get the affordable housing and we're making sure that it's happening. 511.9, the modifications and interpretations. That's what I talked about before, about the clarifications on that to try to make sure that it's more clear as far as it's more predictable, both for the community, the reviewer, and the applicant. And then building form process, basically we put in some language that allows for the review of the building form and the facade standards when they come in for their pre-application, so they can get ahead of it and make sure that they're actually complying early on in the process. So that's CCT and the changes and what we have in front of you. I do want to talk really quickly. We are proposing some small changes to the electric vehicle charging regulations. This was really going back to that September 11th study session where we got direction from mayor and council to go through and revise those standards related to a handful of things. One was site expansions, make sure that it only applies to newly developed parking areas in case of expansions, establishing a path for EV requirements when less parking is provided, and then we held a public meeting and got feedback from the public on that led to the proposal in front of you. And the proposed code is pretty simple, but I think it's pretty important and pretty impactful. It's really making 3 changes. Amending those standards to make to base it on the number of required EVSE parking spaces, the total amount of parking provided, not required. That was a bit of an issue to where the loft had plenty of parking, but because it was based on the required instead of provided, it could cause issues. And then adjust requirements on expansions of existing sites. And ultimately, we did clarify some language related to ADA compliant EV charging spaces. So with that, staff recommends that the Planning Commission recommend approval of the proposed community quarters tool and electric vehicle supply equipment, Unified Development Code Amendment to Mayor and Council. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dan. Commissioners, shall we have any questions for staff before we open up public hearing? Commissioner Zagier.
Hi, so this has been a long process and it's been, I think, really productive. And I want to thank you all at the city and the rest of the commissioners for all the hard work that's been done. So I have a few things. I'm going to keep it as brief as I can. I want to go back to the proposed. So you guys, I've looked at all the maps and it's clear that you guys did a lot of work. It points out exactly what properties CCT may apply to. And so of all those properties you looked at, how many of those proposed sites for CCT are 12 acres or more? And I mean, is that just like a handful of them? I imagine most of them are under 12 acres. And I'm still concerned, and this kind of goes with, I'm still concerned about the lack of neighborhood notification. That's the first question. And as far as the EVSE parking, how is that going to work out as far as our current administration in the White House? And everybody calls it Doge, I call it Doggy. And I'm still concerned about creating a canyon effect down collector streets. Being over 3 stories, I would say would be the max, in my opinion. I understand the need for I don't like big open empty parking lots. I want to see something like this be developed in Tucson. We do need the housing, and this is a good strategy. As far as the reduced or flexible parking, is there anything that would prevent a developer that says, well, if you want a parking space, you have to pay extra for that parking space? And that is designated, considering they will not have probably not have a parking space for each unit. I'm not sure if there's anything in the code that restricts people who have rental apartments from charging that fee. And let's see. Oh, the last one is still concerned about the height. Reading through comments of people, is a lot of people are concerned about the shading effect that might occur depending on how the development is placed on their current solar panels that they spend a lot of money on. And those are the few things. So how many 12-acre parcels have been identified? The EV parking, the possible of not using collector streets, and still the issue of parking if there's in neighborhood areas, and will the city address that? Okay.
Okay, Commissioner Zagier, I have a few things I think, respond to on that. First one is, I don't know exactly how many parcel or proposed sites are 12 acres or more. When we did our opportunity and site analysis, we did look at a lot of them. They're generally at the intersections of arterials and other arterials. So if you think about Grant and Alvernon, actually, both of those parcels on the east side are all over 12 acres. If you look at 22nd and Kolb, northeast corner, that's a 12-acre parcel. That's actually, I think, 14 acres or so. So you're really generally going to see those at the intersections because they're the areas that have the depth and the width in order to actually be that large. So that's generally where you're going to see them. They are, I mean, there are quite a few, but again, that's where you're going to see them. The EVSE, how that's going to work out, we have the ability to have those requirements here in the city unless we're preempted by the state on something like that. Generally, we're okay, even with the current situation. Anything that restricts parking, charging for parking, which is like decoupling of housing from parking. We don't have anything that restricts that. In fact, it's generally a good strategy for reducing rental costs overall because you aren't forced into actually having a parking space if you don't need it. And then generally paying for it, which that cost is rolled into the cost of the unit. So there isn't anything that kind of restricts that. And I do want to point out one last thing related to solar considerations. So there's a lot of requirements that aren't within 511 that are still applicable. That's one of, we have the stuff in 511, but there's all the other stuff with the code. And one of those are solar considerations. And it still has to meet the solar considerations that current development all has to do, which is to take into effect the fact of your impact on surrounding solar installations. So that's already built into the code.
What is the code number on that? I'd like to look at it.
Of course, it's under 7.3.
7-3, thank you.
Yes. Mhm.
Commissioner Small.
Thank you, Dan. And to the staff, I'd like to commend you on putting together a really sort of digestible presentation here that I think really explains in good context what what we're trying to achieve here. And giving it to us so that we can look at it on our screens rather than an angle. Thank you. I don't have any questions so much as a statement. I'm a native of Tucson, and I've lived here longer than, well, I moved away, but I grew up here longer than sometimes I care to admit. And excuse me, you know, I can remember, well, for instance, now watching a Starbucks be built at the corner of Grant and Campbell in an area that used to house an El Rancho market, a Walgreens with a really good soda fountain, and all of its parking. And now it is only the Starbucks and all the circulation that's involved in that. And driving here tonight, this evening, the stretch of Broadway between, say, Tucson Boulevard and downtown, that is just ripe for this type of development. And just quickly to say that I think don't miss the opportunity to, this isn't perfect necessarily, but I think the wrinkles will get fleshed out, and don't miss the opportunity to make improvements. Tucson is a different city than I grew up in. Coming back to Tucson 35 years later, it's a different city than I left. It will continue to be a different city in the future, and this, in my mind, is an opportunity to improve Tucson moving into the future. So thank you.
All right, I don't see any other questions from the commissioners. I stand corrected, Commissioner Lampo.
Yeah, really quick. So it is, I just had two really quick questions. So where in the draft ordinance is the language related to vacant at time of adoption for R1 and R2? I didn't actually see that. And then the second question, you say large scale, greater than 15 acres may be referred to the DRB. Is that a shall or is that a may?
It's a shall.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, sorry. It may be referred to the design professional, I think is what. So we have the option to send really any of these to the design professional, but that is a requirement to be sent to the design review board for 12 acres or larger.
Okay. And the language about vacant at time of adoption for R1 and R2?
Let me find it real quickly. Hold on. I believe it's the bottom of page 6. I just want the full. Yeah, 511-2C1 would be the section.
Commissioner McKenzie.
Yeah, real quick, just in line with Tom's comment, there were a couple of places in the document that were still a little vague. One being 5.11.7 incentives. Compliance will be monitored and enforced by HCD on an ongoing basis. I mean, I don't know what ongoing means there, but you know, I'd be happy to put the other ones in an email. I don't want to take up the public's time. I'd rather hear from them, so. But that was one specific one, kind of like Tom. It seemed a little vague.
Great, thank you.
All right, before I open up the public hearing, I have one logistical question for staff with regards to the parking garage. Is there still an 8 o'clock closing on that? And will we need to break at 7:45 for anybody who's parked there?
Well, oh yeah, the parking garage here, I think closes at, 8 o'clock. So yes, we should probably
Okay, so I'll
make
just
sure that at either, you could
I'll call
either-
for a break at 7:45, let everybody know in advance, and then
sounds great.
people can move their cars. All right, with that said, I would like to open this up to a public hearing to the members of the public who would like to speak about this item. In general, there is a 3 to 5 minute, thank you, limit on the number, depending on the number of speakers. It looks like we have quite a few speakers, so I'm going to go ahead and limit it to 3 minutes per individual. And we can ask if you would please clearly state your name and address before speaking. We have 6 requests to speak at this time, and I will begin by calling those individuals. Number 1, and I apologize for mispronouncing anybody's names, but Michael Bettini or Michelle Bettini.
It's Michelle. Thank you.
Great.
Hi, my name is Michelle Bettini, 7789 North Paseo Montserrat. I am the government relations for Metropolitan Pima Alliance. The community corridor tool has strong support backed by SABA, Tucson Association of Realtors, the Tucson Chamber, and of course, Metropolitan Pima Alliance. It addresses housing shortage, encouraging development, advancing reform and dialogue, flexible development standards, affordable housing incentives, economic and quality of life benefits. And we are asking for action from the commission. As Dan said in his report, Tucson needs 8,000 plus homes now and 35,000 by 2035. The tool is key to increasing housing inventory and diversity, and we're asking the commission for prompt action to address this housing crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Artemis June Torre.
Hi. Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
All right, thank you. I'd like to preface by saying I am speaking for both myself and as a representative for Tucson for Everyone. Dear commissioners, Tucson for Everyone is excited to support the proposed Community Corridors Tool, UDC code amendment that will be in consideration. That is in consideration today. We believe that this proposed code amendment will work to address our region-wide housing shortage and especially our need for infill development near existing jobs, schools, and infrastructure, while focusing on delivering housing for neighborhoods with pedestrian scale and walkability in mind. There are currently 2,752 supporters of Tucson for Everyone in Pima County. We know that the housing needs of Tucson citizens are not being met by the existing housing supply. Rents are at historic highs while vacancy rates are at historic lows, both of which are signs that there isn't enough housing to go around. Additionally, homelessness is persistent in our region. When we look at Tucson, we are worried to see that individuals are working full-time and are struggling to afford basic housing. To address this problem, we advocate for abundant housing supply in our city, especially near these aforementioned resources that people need, like jobs, schools, services. And we believe that the proposed community corridors tool will provide more accessible avenues to build the sort of infill developments that will contribute to our housing supply. Particular details such as the applicability of incentives, such as the affordable housing height incentive, they'll specify that specifically assist homeowners, property owners, developers, and design professionals to more readily allow for affordable housing, to better pencil out and maximize housing within future proposed developments. It is our understanding that residents opposing the project have a wide range of concerns, but We believe that many of these concerns stem from a lack of understanding about what the community corridors tool will truly allow to be built and where. We believe that the commissioners and staff have done significant due diligence, listening to the input of the public, incorporating appropriate edits into the proposal. Our group frequently advocates for multimodal transportation improvements. From our perspective, we see issues in our transportation system as existing alongside housing supply problems, and this proposed code amendment works to prioritize the kind of walkable development and multimodal transportation near existing corridors of transportation. So people will have the option to use modes of transport that aren't driving, and so that many of
Thank
the
you, Mr.
concerns.
Torrey. Your time is up at 3 minutes. I
All right.
appreciate your time and your comments. Our next speaker is Lauren Esker. Ms. Esker, are you online? Okay, we can come back to you at the end of this. I'll call Andy Courtney next. Andy Courtney. All right, I can go ahead and call that name after we are finished with this list. Moving on to Gustavo Silva. Okay, we have Gustavo in the audience. Thank you.
Hello. Oh yeah. Thank
Floor is
you.
yours.
Okay. First of all, I want to extend my gratitude to the city staff for their hard work in crafting a proposal that aims to revitalize these corridors and collectors, areas that currently present an uninviting, inhospitable environment for anyone but cars. This proposal is thoughtful and pragmatic, utilizing lots that are far from ideal for single-family residences, while also alleviating the pressure on our beloved neighborhoods. Having attended many of these meetings, I am familiar with the arguments against the CCT. We have heard many worries about the potential loss of on-street parking in front of people's homes, despite the fact that every home in this city is required to have 2 on-site parking spaces. We have also heard a lot of complaints about people losing the view from their backyards. Some people might lose what were before 3 mountain ranges could just diminish to just 2. These are all very valid concerns that we should consider on one side of the balance. On the other side, we have the voices of everyone that's not represented here tonight. We have the 8,000 families we are short of housing for. We have the renting population, which is about 50% of our residents, who are facing constant displacements as housing prices continue to escalate beyond their means. We have the unhoused community, who are finding shelter down the rivers and having to burn trees during winter. So I urge the Planning Commission to remember that the policies we implement must reflect the needs of everyone, not just of the loudest voices. Let us not forget everyone that's not here tonight, and let us make sure we make policies for an equitable city. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Silva. Next on the ahead of time list is Suzanne Schaefer.
I'm Suzanne Schaefer. I live at 628 North 3rd Avenue, so I'm in the fortunate walkable area, which really would be a lot more walkable if there weren't so many cars everywhere, including in the sidewalk area where I'm supposed to be able to walk. I didn't write anything, so I'll try to keep this short because there's a lot to talk about. And I just really want to appreciate the staff's great work on this whole process and tool. And sometimes I complain about community outreach, but I think you've done a really, really super job this particular time. I sympathize with, well, the whole spillover parking thing. The reason there's so many cars in the neighborhoods is because we're so car oriented that the path of least resistance is to do everything in the car, and that's what needs to change. And I will just say quickly that as a person who does have the good fortune to own a home, which is amazingly like the majority of people who come to these microphones do, when I need to move out of that home, my fond hope is that I would be able to find an apartment in this city where I do not have to pay for somebody else's parking space. And that is not a fringe concern. I go to so many meetings where people talk about concerns about, you can't reduce the parking because everybody's going to have a car and nobody's going to ride a bike because it's too hot, et cetera, et cetera. And it's really difficult to sit in those rooms year after year because I feel invisible. And I will say that I sympathize with your difficulty in finding a parking space because I have that problem all the time because I ride a bike. And in our car-oriented environment, most places don't care about giving me a place to park. So thank you for your work. Please recommend this to the mayor and council, and we will make sure they pass it.
Thank you, Ms. Schaefer. All right, next up on the list is Mr. Ton Warren.
Tom Warren, 6701 North St. Andrews Drive. I'm a local developer. I'm here representing myself, and also I'm on the committee of MPA. I'm on the MPA board. The thing I'd like to address is the macro effect of this. All these points that were brought up by Dan and have been mentioned are obviously very valid, and they're very personal to all of us as citizens. But on a macroeconomic point, what this does is it attracts capital. And capital in our city sometimes is very difficult to attract. I was asked by mayor and council to head up the drive, if you will, and adoption of the main gate overlay some 12 years ago, 13 years ago. We had to have a very good document. Everyone knows the rules. There's no guesswork. The neighborhoods were extremely involved. And upon the adoption, we've raised almost $1 billion of capital to build residence for students, because the capital came in because they knew the rules and there weren't a lot of hurdles to go through or jump over. And that's why the capital did come. One of the positive events, talking about housing prices, is 5,000 plus students have been taken out of, if you will, the general housing market in Tucson. And that those 5,000 students would have lived in houses, driven up prices in central and the west side of Tucson. So there are very positive effects. Here, I think the positive effect, besides the development occurring, will raise city tax revenues because the economic pie will be larger. And also, we will have a better share of the state tax that's refunded back to our city. So I really encourage the adoption of this. And I really think, as it was said earlier by the gentleman I sat next to outside, waiting for the door to open, I feel that it's going to really change the city in the fact that Tucson will be able to attract capital like it's really never been able to before. And this is a well thought out plan. The capital will be put to good use and really improve our entire city. Thank you, and respectfully, Tom.
Thank you, Mr. Warren. Next up, I have, apologize for this mispronunciation, Matthew Barple.
Good evening. My name is Matthew Beppel. I live at 3519 South Liberty Avenue in Tucson's Ward 1. I live my life as car-free as possible, and I want to emphasize how important it is that this tool moves forward to council with your recommendation. These proposed code changes will have a real impact on making Tucson a more inclusive city for people like me. 1/3 of our population is car-free, whether by choice, age, disability, affordability, or many other reasons. Yet so much of our built environment is still geared towards cars over people. The Community Corridor tool is a step towards changing that and will open the doors to the type of development that truly supports transit users, cyclists, and pedestrians, all people who deserve safe, accessible, and connected communities. I urge you to support this tool and ensure it moves forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up, I have Carson Woodruff.
Hello, my name is Carson Woodruff. I'm at 345 East Congress Street, and I just want to come out in support of this tool. I'm representing myself, by the way, but as a resident and student living here in Tucson, I think that the Community Corridors tool is an amazing opportunity for us to promote infill and flexibility development along our corridors. And I think encouraging walkability and transit-oriented development is very important here. Walkability helps community health, community wealth, culture, and climate-related issues, as well as housing. And I think these are all very important issues to us here in Tucson. So just want to thank you all for your work on the CCT, and I want to support this tool as much as I can. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up, I have Serena Warake.
Hi, I'm Serena Warake at 911 West 25th Street, and today I'll be speaking on behalf of Corky Poster. Commissioners, good evening. My name is Corky Poster. I'm an architect, an AICP certified planner, and a principal with Poster Murdo McDonald. My daughter just gave birth in DC, so I am unable to attend in person. For the past 50 years, I have been engaged in the design and development of affordable housing in Southern Arizona. Our current count is 4,900 housing units. Put in more human terms, that's 145 million times a person has put their head down on a pillow in a bedroom that we designed. I know from this experience that building affordable housing is not easy. It is a minefield of obstacles. The UDC, the building code, financing, program relations, construction challenges, taxes and impact fees, rising material and labor costs, all make housing development difficult. With all that complexity, the feasibility of any particular housing development lives around the margins. Small things can determine whether a project is financially feasible or not. And I will remind everyone in this room that 90% of you live in a home or an apartment built by a developer, and each one of those developers had to think very hard to make the development of your home feasible. In that context, I want to thank staff for the CCT before you. They have worked tirelessly with extensive public input to identify those elements of the UDC that, with small adjustments, can begin to make infeasible projects feasible. You have been told that Tucson needs an immediate 8,747 housing units with an additional 11,279 units needed in the next 5 years. Our professional experience confirms that staff has identified exactly those elements of the UDC that are persistent obstacles to getting more housing built. As a current example, our firm is working on a proposed residential project on West Miracle Mile. The Amazon Flats is a low-income housing tax credit project. With the current UDC, this site allows 30 units, far below the feasible count for projects of this type. In the specific example, the CCT provides relief from split zoning, allows an extra story for affordable housing, allows a fair density calculation, and allows more realistic requirements for parking. With the CCT, we're able to build 58 units. The CCT literally makes this project feasible. The last 5 affordable housing projects that our firm designed were made feasible using one of Tucson's overlay tools, either the IID, the IID update, and the GRID. PDSD's innovative zoning efforts truly made the difference. Targeted overlays work. Finally, I want to remind you about your responsibility as commissioners today. You will hear from a long line of residents with some of the most privileged neighborhoods in Tucson, how the CCT will dramatically affect the quality of their lives, cause the sky to fall, and as one op-ed put it, change Tucson forever. That is hyperbole of the most self-serving variety. You heard exactly the same thing about the ADU ordinance from exactly the same people. The changes proposed by PDSD are small and incremental. Staff has studied those particular obstacles.
Your 3 minutes is up.
Okay, thank you.
Next up, I have Ryan Stevenson.
Greetings, commissioners. My name is Ryan Stevenson. I live at 350 North Silver Bell Road, West Side, represent. As a professional planner and contributing stakeholder to both Tucson's ADU ordinance and Tucson Norte Sewer project, I just want to give kudos to the city staff and the consultants for their efforts on putting together the CCT tool. And I don't think that it's going to be sufficient in getting us our walkable urbanism, but it's totally necessary. So just as our commissioners, I'm asking you to recommend approval to mayor and council. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up, I have Emily Yetman.
Okay, good evening. I'm Emily Yetman. I'm actually here on behalf of Living Streets Alliance. We're a nonprofit here in Tucson. I live at 776 South 9th Avenue, just south of here. But I'm even more so compelled to be here to talk to you all tonight in support of the CCT because of what I've heard and my colleagues have heard from people out in the community over the past dozen years of talking with folks about what they need and what they want for their transportation future. What we've heard over and over is that people want our streets to be safe from traffic violence. They want to be able to move around with dignity and ease, no matter who they are or how they're getting around. They want safe and connected bikeways and pedestrian walkways, and they want a transit system that they can easily navigate and rely on. And so though transportation is at the forefront of our work and our conversations that we're having, the really hidden and essential piece in creating that future that people want is land use, right? So I see the CCT as a way to start cultivating that future. Bill, you talked about the Starbucks up on Campbell and Grant. And on the way here, I was thinking about the one that went in at Speedway and 6th Avenue recently. And it was so cool because that lot had been vacant for so long. And it was like, something's finally going in there. And then to see what ended up there, and then insult to injury that there's now a second drive-through only, coffee shop that's not local across the street. I mean, that was already a hairy intersection to go through on foot or on bike. And now you have the added stress of all sorts of additional turn actions, cars speeding through. And just what a missed opportunity, right? We're close to Pima Community College, we're close to downtown, we're on a transit line, we're by the U of A, we're by the streetcar. So that could have been a perfect place for mixed use development with housing and local businesses. Instead, we have a sea of parking lots, and that's going to be really uncomfortable for people once it gets hot out again, which actually was today. So here's maybe a different angle, just to think about kind of the ripple effect that this has on our quality of life. Land use is essential to mode shift, right? So transit really needs density in order to work. Transit is also the safest mode of transportation. So if we can get people out of their cars, our streets become safer. So building up along these transit corridors is a way to start to address the traffic safety fatality crisis that we're facing in Tucson. We're third in the country for deaths in our streets for people walking. So these things add up and make a difference over time. I won't go on. Is it 3 minutes?
That's 3 minutes.
I
right off
won't
the
go
top.
on. I'm done. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Next up, I have Clifton Fenwong Nelson.
Sorry for my chicken scratch. My name's Clifton Fanawong Nelson. I live in the barrio San Antonio, and I'm here representing myself. I'm here to express my strong support for the Community Corridors tool. I want to see a Tucson that has fewer parking lots, storage units, drive-through restaurants like Starbucks, and vacant lots. To replace all of these, I want to see land that is used to create homes, local businesses, and opportunities. I want to see a Tucson that is a city of inclusion, not exclusion. We must be neighbors for more neighbors, not a community that prioritizes land to sit vacant or have storage units and drive-throughs over homes and local businesses. So thank you, and please vote in support of CCT.
Thank you. Next up, I have Lauren Fenwong Nelson.
Hi, good evening. My name is Lauren Van Wong Nelson, and I am a resident of Tucson and live as a renter in Barrio San Antonio. And I'm here representing myself. I'm here to express my strong support for the Community Corridors tool. Right now, we see too many car-centric developments, drive-throughs, personal storage facilities, and gas stations taking up valuable space. Land that could be used to create homes, businesses, and opportunities for more people to live in high-opportunity areas. Instead of fostering vibrant, mixed-use neighborhoods, these types of developments reinforce car dependency and limit access to housing in places where people could walk, bike, or take transit to work, school, and essential services. The Community Corridors tool provides a solution by giving both property owners and developers the option to build something better. Housing that's affordable and accessible, mixed-use developments that support local businesses, and pedestrian-friendly spaces that strengthen our neighborhoods. This tool helps us to increase prosperity by opening up more housing opportunities in desirable locations. It creates a variety of housing choices so people of all incomes can live near jobs, transit, and services. It encourages redevelopment and of underutilized commercial properties instead of letting them sit vacant. And it reduces car-oriented sprawl and promotes developments that align with our climate action goals. As members of the Planning Commission, you have the opportunity to support a tool that will increase economic opportunity, encourage smart growth, and create a more multimodal, equitable city. I urge you to recommend approval of the Community Corridors tool and help us build a Tucson where everyone has a chance to thrive. Thank you.
Very much. Next up, I have Rory Juneman.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I'm Rory Juneman. I'm at 60 East Calle Primorosa in the city of Tucson. For those of you who I haven't met, I'm a land use attorney here, but I am speaking today on my behalf, my family's behalf as residents of Central Tucson. We've lived here for 25 years. We love it, but I've always thought that Tucson sort of struggled with whether or not it wanted to be a big town or a small city. And I think a lot of that has to do with our zoning code. Dan mentioned it in the presentation that really we have a suburban zoning code and it's guided our development since the code was implemented. I think this community corridor tool is a really bold step in helping the city become, helping Tucson become an actual city. I actually don't think that this tool is going to show immediate impact. I think it's going to take a little while, but I think it is a absolute strong foundation for our future growth in the decades to come. This foundation is important because the tool focuses on areas of the city that have existing infrastructure, the roads and the utilities, prioritizes high-density housing, which is better for our water use and all of our utility needs, consolidates growth along the corridors, which I actually think is going to help protect the neighborhoods. And it's going to provide more opportunities for multimodal transportation and transit, which I think is key to a city actually growing. To accomplish these things, we really need this the CCT to not be, I'll just say it, kind of watered down. I think it should have gone further, but I think this is a great start. And so I encourage you to recommend approval of this as proposed. And I also want to thank you all for your time and really thank staff for the great job that they've done over the last year, or particularly the last few months. So thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Next up, I have Jackson Cassidy.
Hi, my name is Jackson Cassidy. Thank you, commissioners, for allowing me the opportunity to speak. I live at 2946 North Euclid Avenue. I'm a resident of Tucson. I'm also an urban planner here in town. And I think most of my points have already been said. I'll just say that I think staff did a great job with crafting this proposal. And I urge the commission to approve or to recommend approval of this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, I have Kathleen Lujan, or Caitlin Lujan, sorry.
Hi, my name is Caitlin Lujan. I live in Hedrick Acres, and I'm speaking on behalf of myself. Because everyone has already spoken so eloquently, I will just say I am strongly in support of the community corridors tool and recommend and would like you to recommend its approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Elliot Welch.
Good evening, commissioners. My name is Elliot Welch. I'm a resident of Tucson. I live as a renter in Armory Park, and I am only representing myself. I'm here to express my strong support for the Community Corridors tool. First, thank you to the planning and development staff for the hard work on the Community Corridor tool, especially a shout out to the public information team that made the educational video. They did a great job. Second, please do not cave to neighborhood NIMBYs that feign interest in improving projects, but whose true motivations are only to delay and stop projects that might impact the mountain view from their living room or someone they don't know parking on their public street. Having a mountain view from your home is a privilege that should not be more important than someone having a place to live. For too long, the city of Tucson has been a city of potential, full of vacant lots and ideal locations with existing infrastructure. And too often, these lots are filled with drive-throughs, personal storage, gas stations, parking lots, and other low-density land uses that do not meet their potential. The Community Corridor tool creates opportunities to build vibrant community spaces that are places for people to live, bike, work, and play. It encourages turning vacant lots into destinations for everyone. Members of the Planning Commission, tonight you have the opportunity to support a tool that will help the city of Tucson reach its full potential. Please vote to recommend approval of the tool and help us build a Tucson that can meet its potential. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, I have Karen Esker.
Hi, I'm Karen Esker, and I live in 502 West 17th Street. I am here for myself and homeless children. As an educator, I witnessed the devastating impact of housing instability on my students daily. This year alone, over 23% of students in my school are considered homeless or housing insecure. These children struggle to focus on learning because they do not know where they'll sleep at night. Kids who carry the weight of uncertainty on their small shoulders are trying to navigate school while facing challenges no child should endure. If we continue our path, Tucson will be 30,000 housing units short in just 10 years. I understand the appeal of preserving scenic views, but I also know that every child deserves a stable home, a place where they can feel safe, dream big, and build a future. This is about housing and the kind of community we want to be, if not for the children, then for our future. Because a city that prioritizes housing is one that thrives for generations to come.
Thank you. Next up, I have Jonathan Salvatierra. Jonathan Salvatierra. Okay, next up, Lucy Orozco.
Hello, good evening. My name is Lucy, representing myself. And as an adult with a master's degree in mental health counseling, I find it astounding that housing has become so scarce for young professionals like me. Tucson is facing serious housing crisis, making it increasingly difficult for people to afford renting or owning a home. The Corridors Tool project aims to help bridge that gap, providing much needed support for those struggling to find stable housing in our community. And I hope you support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, I have Betsy Larson.
Hello, my name is Betsy Larson. I live at 820 North 6th Avenue. I'm here for myself, but I'm also president of the West University Neighborhood Association. And I actually have some really personal involvement with this. We were involved in the past 5 years with Capstone's development, which was a very big, we know infill. We have been the recipients of a lot of the unintended consequences of mass infill with the main gate square. So I just kind of wanted to, CCT is incredibly important and the city of Tucson really needs it. But one of the things I wanted to make sure that all of you guys understand is that there's been some pitfalls to the infill that's happened along 4th Avenue in the university area. The biggest being if you look at the Hub or RE or any of the Speedway retail sites underneath the student housing towers, those remain empty. And they're empty because they're not built out. So no local businesses can afford to go into those retail spaces. So they are blights on 4th Avenue. They're places of crime and unwanted behavior. It's just, so something going forward as you're getting into the details of the CCT is to think about these retail spaces and how large developers are not investing into them and they're just going to remain open. We've got countless examples. The other thing I think we really need to think about is enlarging the development areas. When a large development does come in, sidewalks, safety lighting, stormwater drainage, all those things need to happen in an area that I don't think necessarily is encapsulated in the current area development parameters. The other thing we need to think about is TEP transmission lines are not compatible with infill. This last week at the zoning hearing was a point of contention. The UA area plan, I think, provides some good outline for that. But if we're going to be thinking about infill, we need to be thinking about what's above head and how is that going to be compatible in the future. And lastly, I think we do need to empower the neighborhoods along these corridors. Rebecca has done a great job with neighborhood resource outreach, but a lot of these neighborhoods are lacking the resources and the institutional knowledge to really combat aggressive, greedy developers that might come along. And so I think we really need to help these neighborhoods develop their neighborhood plans and build some resiliency that they may not have in place already. And lastly, we do, and the city needs to keep thinking about this, but TFD has not added any infill stations, and we're adding thousands of people to areas that don't have any additional staffing. So stations 1, 3, and 5, they're at max capacity. So we really need to be thinking about public safety too as we add more people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I do realize we have just a few more hands up online, but we do need to take a quick break so we can get cars out of the parking garage. So with that, 8-minute rest.
On audio.
Commission back into order. If everybody could please take their seats. Thank you very much. All right. Thank you all for entertaining that short break. Go ahead and reinstate the public hearing, and just for those with short memory like mine, when you come up, if you could please state your name and your address, and we'll be continuing a 3-minute limit. I went ahead and missed Ben Carpenter, so I'd call him right now.
Good evening, commissioners, planning staff. Thanks to the staff for all the work you've done put into this. I live at 2641 East Croydon Street. My name is Ben Carpenter. I'm here in support of the Community Corridors tool, and I'm here of my own accord representing myself. I live in the Broadmoor Broadway Village neighborhood, and I'm a homeowner. I also hold a graduate degree in urban planning, have worked in housing and planning in the city of Tucson, and I'm also a retired disabled combat veteran. As you may know, the state of Arizona has all kinds of preemptions that make it more difficult to build housing than it is in lots of other places. So what we have to do is use local workarounds and overlay districts and all kinds of different policy tools to get to the place where we can actually do the development that we want to see. So I just want to say, first and foremost, that without meaningful zoning reform, we will not get the development that we want and need, and we will not get the housing that this community so desperately needs. The tools that we have are not necessarily sufficient to get where we're going, and that's why the CCT is so critical. The CCT is critical because it is basically the only thing, along with our other overlay districts and policy that is not preempted by the state, that allows us to get sustainable development in our communities. And on that note, I would strongly suggest not watering down the language in the CCT, specifically around building heights. And as evidence for how damaging that is, I would just like to ask the commission or staff how many affordable units of housing have been realized through the Sunshine Mile overlay. The answer is 0. And that's because neighborhoods fought to keep height at a level that caused the projects to die. I also have worked in affordable housing real estate development, have underwritten many affordable housing projects, and continue to monitor costs of materials, labor, and all the other things that it takes to get there. And as Corky noted earlier, remotely through a proxy, affordable housing gets developed in the margins. It really does. It's really hard to make those projects work, and it's really hard to pull everything together. So we as a community cannot afford to shelve creative zoning. We have to move forward in our zoning reform. Land use and regulation in Tucson is outdated. It needs to be reformed and is contributing to unsustainable development, increased urban heat, dangerous car-centric environments. And land use regulation in the United States has often been used to concentrate wealth, favor groups over others, shape access to resources. And I just want to say one final thing, and that would be, this is a conversation about land use, but your vote and your recommendation and your choice is about social and environmental justice. Thank you.
Right. I would like to go ahead and back to the top of the list and call Logan Havens.
My name is Logan Havens. I am at 905 South Kroger Lane. I am an unpaid speaker speaking for myself. Speaking Tom spoke about the student towers in Main Gate Village. I moved here about 8 years ago. At that time, I didn't understand at the time what was happening, but half of the neighborhood was for sale. My house, the two neighboring houses around the corner, they were all affordable, 4% interest rate, $100,000 to $200,000. Every other house on the block. We learned it was because the towers had been finished and the students moved out of our neighborhood, and it allowed many of us, young professionals, young families, to be able to move into that neighborhood and buy the homes, fix up the homes, and the neighborhood dramatically changed. We put in green infrastructure, and we really did a lot of work in that neighborhood. And so looking at this tool and looking at certain things, like one of the common projects I've been to most of these meetings is that, or one of the common comments is that we want neighbors to have feedback on the projects. My personal opinion is that we don't get feedback on that Starbucks that's going to take up 45,000 square feet of land. We don't get feedback on the gas station going on in across the street between me and downtown. We don't get feedback on all of these things. We don't get feedback on single family housing. And we're demanding that these single family housing units get to have feedback on all of this rental housing. Our city is half renters. So what I would just want to say is what everybody else is saying. It's overwhelmingly positive for this from the feedback I read online or from this meeting tonight. But this is one step. It's going to take a long time. It's going to be slow. It's going to be marginal. We're going to have a chance for course correction if we see issues. Similar with the ADU policy, it was one built in the first year of that policy. We're going to have time to observe, watch, listen, and adjust. And I'm sure planning and development is going to be watching. Last thing is that my neighbors across the street that lived in the rental apartments, those units used to be $400 or $500 a month. One of them worked for the School of the Blind on Speedway. She would walk or take the bus every day. Her rent doubled, and she had to move 2 miles north with 2 bus changes now. And so that person that used to translate our little library with Braille for us, imprint the Braille so that we could see it, so kids could familiarize themselves with it, she was forced to move far enough away where she, as a non-driver, couldn't get to her work anymore. So as we're applying this, it's one step towards housing affordability and improving those corridors that are pretty ugly, and preserving our neighborhoods, which are pretty adorable. So I think it's overwhelmingly positive from what I'm hearing. Thank you for your time.
You. Next up, Andy Courtney. I see you online with your hand up.
Yes, hi. Sorry, just a little technical difficulty. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I represent 2 large properties, vacant properties on Stone and Wetmore, and Limberlost and Stone. Perfect examples of prototype projects that would benefit from this CCT. The difficulty is I'm one of the few developers now currently building what I would consider market rate condominiums in the city that are affordable along the River and Campbell area. And what I'm finding is there's significant demand and little opportunity to repeat what I'm doing based upon the zoning restrictions that are current in these areas. These 2 properties that I represent are perfect examples of how we could expand the number of affordable homes built by going higher with higher heights and density to make it more affordable to build and provide this kind of product. The difficulty with this is these 2 properties are zoned R2. And I've had many discussions with staff about the need to expand the availability of R2 to be included in the CCT and not continually having references to why it's not included. The problem with our antiquated zoning is it does also apply to the R2 zone, which is actually a multifamily zone as well, but that's typically only allowed 2 stories. It's impossible to build, I can tell you, it's impossible to build in this environment and make affordable homes with 2 stories on a 3 to 4 acre site like this. We'll end up with an underutilized site. We can make some amazing projects in these areas. They are on the major transportation corridors. The Tucson Norte Sur is perfect. They align right with that. We can encourage the use of transit versus the cars, creating shade, open areas, and where people can congregate. if the sites can be utilized by going higher density. Unfortunately, our hands are tied to be able to develop something with the cost of development. And we'd like to get the parking underground. We'd like to, under one level. So it's not just taking up the whole open space. Lots of creative ideas that we can do, but unfortunately the CCT falls short for the R2. And I really encourage them to open this up with some added provisions, expanding the availability for R2 to be used and included in it. These are two prime examples, Stone and Wetmore across from the Tucson Mall, plenty of retail around, and R2 zoning is not compatible. If I go through a rezoning process, extensive rezoning, there's unsurety, there's cost factors that would add to the cost of the development and add to the cost for the ultimate users. I implore you to open the process up a little bit further and go beyond this. I think the concept is excellent. I think it makes total sense. We see it in other communities, as Dan has referenced, and it will encourage the opportunity for more homes that are affordable and usable. So I appreciate all the efforts of the staff. I am in support of it. I just would like to see some more opportunities for these types of projects that are actually encouraging a nefarious use on them right now. We spend thousands of dollars a month cleaning up from those activities. So appreciate your hearing me, and I hope to see this passed.
Thank you. Okay. That concludes, I believe, everybody that has written in and signed up to speak. So I'm going to go ahead and open it up to those who have their hands raised online and anybody in the audience. I've seen Anthony up since the beginning, so I'll go ahead and start with you.
Hello, my name is Anthony Nelson. I live in Barrio Sin Nombre, 333 South Mountwood Avenue. I've lived for the last 15 years around development that is nonstop. My major concern is that the IID I seen for a quick minute. This it was about 5:36 what I learned about this meeting online, that the IID, I'm not sure how much it is included in that, but that greatly affects us. The concerns I have is that we're in the process of creating a neighborhood plan, and it's a joint plan with the Menlo Park Neighborhood Association. And one of the commission members is the president of that neighborhood association. So I got a concern that maybe that's a conflict of interest. I'm not sure, but however, there's so much to add to it. I wish this would go on a ballot to the people to let the people vote on it. And I'm going to leave you guys with that.
Thank you very much. Next up, I have Ange. ANNJ. Ange going once, twice.
Sorry, I couldn't figure out how to unmute. Yeah, my name is Annie Dacus. I'm at 3414 East Kai Alarcon. And this is kind of my only comment of the evening. I find this whole thing really interesting. I went to the Ward 3 and Ward 6 meetings, neighborhood meetings, and I will tell you guys, being here tonight and watching the comments, both online and in person, make me feel like I'm watching a propaganda video for the city. It's clear that many of these people, to me, are not representative of how people in Tucson feel about this. I went to both neighborhood meetings in Ward 3 and Ward 6, and I would say the vast majority of people, after watching this whole presentation, which I've seen 3 times, are not in favor of most aspects of this. You know, I think we all know that there are some needs that are not being met in Tucson in terms of housing. But I also think that there are major objections to height, actually. I guess I'm one of those, what did you call us, neighborhood NIMBYs that likes to see mountain views. But I would say a lot of people in Tucson are like that. And that includes people in South Tucson and people that have lived here for a long time. So I think the height is a major problem for most people in Central Tucson. They do feel like it's going to invade on their privacy. And I think the other major thing is, you guys talk about homeless children and homeless people. There's nothing except for an incentive in this for developers to build, affordable housing. I think we all know that. And for some reason, we keep talking about how this is going to transform, affordable housing for Tucson, but this is basically going to put a lot of money in developers' pockets. We're going to see the Benedictine built 10 times around Tucson. So that's what I'm hearing in my neighborhood from literally everybody. That's what I heard at the Ward 3 meeting. That's what I heard at the Ward 6 meeting. I appreciate that you guys rallied lots and lots of people to come to this who are in support, but I can tell you right now that my neighborhood is not in support of this, and most of the neighborhoods are not. The other thing, and this is the last thing I will say, because it looks like this is going through regardless, you guys have sort of opened this up to people that already support it. But what I would also say is that we are not being realistic about public transportation. You cannot get on a bus here. I've got 2 kids. I wouldn't take my kids on the bus in Tucson. It takes an hour to get across the city. It's not safe. There's homeless people sleeping on the bus. So I would take public transportation if I could get to work in less than 45 minutes, but instead I drive because it takes 10 minutes, So we have a lot of things to fix before we make this a bike-friendly, public transport-friendly city and pass buildings that are going to be 6 stories high. And I'm speaking for the public because I know that's how most people feel, not this audience that you've gathered this evening. So thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, I have Ryan Laber.
Okay, thank you. So my name is Ryan Laber, and I'm speaking on behalf of a multifamily real estate development company called Spire Development, and speaking in support of passage of the CCT. My background is I'm a professional engineer and a planner by training. And as I said, I currently work as a developer of multifamily housing, including an 84-unit new construction independent living for seniors project in the Barrio Nepal neighborhood that'll break ground this spring. I think first off, as a planner, I just congratulate staff on their work on the very thoughtful proposal. It seems like there's been a lot of policy thinking and data that's informed the overlay language. And I think planning staff here has done a really good job above and beyond what a lot of plan departments are achieving in peer cities. As a developer, I would just share that I think that this tool will bring much more certainty and much more confidence necessary for the development community to invest in projects in Tucson, especially in this economic environment with a lot of uncertainties on the horizon, risking time to chase sites with regulatory uncertainty and regulatory burdens, risking capital to engage design professionals to develop site plans. All that is not taken lightly at all. And the CCT would provide confidence for the development community to start making this type of investment. And so I do think it'd have an appreciable impact in revitalizing vacant and blighted properties along the city's corridors. I'll quickly share a concrete example. There's a site that we're interested in developing right now. It's 3/4 of an acre, but it's split by 3 different zoning districts. And so right now there's not clarity or certainty as to what could be developed there. And the CCT would alleviate that regulatory risk and provide the opportunity for that site to be developed into new construction housing for seniors. So I think that the CCT overlay would ensure that the ladder of opportunity that is housing is extended to more community members, and that the supply of housing is not artificially constrained by regulations. So I'll just conclude by saying thanks for your time serving on the commission. And I ask that you vote to advance the CCT tool to the mayor and council. Thanks.
Thank you. Next up, I have Beryl online. Beryl.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I'm Beryl Baker. I don't actually, I reside over on Mission on a 6-lane highway. And back in Volgie's time, we believed in exactly what you're talking about, but there's been a lot of problems, and I've been to the meetings so I agree with Angie's comments about what the neighbors and neighborhood people think about this thing. As part of that, I just want to make a couple of comments. It sounds like that the 12-acre is the only time when residents will have any input. Otherwise, neighborhoods will not have any input to what can affect them. Living along a major street, it's loud, it's dangerous, and it's annoying. And thinking about all these people living along these major streets could be an unpleasant situation for them. Also, I think it would be more dangerous for the drivers. And I'm wondering how many of you would choose to live on such a corridor. Encouraging more people to live in Tucson uses more water, which we have not been able to really address yet. And do we really want Tucson to be LA or even Phoenix? Do we really want to change the character of our city into something, a big city, New York? And that's kind of what I see possibly happening when you see the cliffs you'd be going up on these corridors. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I see no more hands up online. Is there anyone else in the public who would like to speak? Going once, twice, 3 times. Okay, I would like to go ahead and entertain a motion to conclude the public hearing from the commission.
I'll go ahead and make a motion to close the public hearing, Chair.
I have a motion. Do I
I
get a second?
had my hand up.
Nancy?
Yeah.
Oh, your hand isn't up.
Oh, I had tapped raise hand. Well, okay.
The
Can
public
we
hearing
hear
has
from
not
Nancy?
closed, so you can go ahead and speak your 3 minutes. Thank you.
Oh, are you going to allow me?
We did not close the public hearing, so yes, we will allow.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry because I had tapped the raise hand thing and I guess it somehow didn't work. But
the nick of time.
I'm Nancy DeFeo. I live 2122 East 6th Street. And there are so many good things about this. And then there are so many things that could be very detrimental. And I agree a lot with Anne. My biggest thing is that it does not immediately address the need for affordable low income housing. It's not written in there as a requirement because the state won't allow that to be required in zoning. And the CCT, it only has a little incentive. So if, for instance, you're building, you're given the permission to build a 6-story, we'll let you build 7 if you include some low-income housing. Well, developers, I can't see that as an incentive. Why would they want to do that, to put the extra money in to include that? It doesn't make any sense. And then they'd have to go through like 30 years of oversight of making sure that they are providing low-income housing. So I don't know what developer is going to do that, build that into their market rate and high-end homes. And as Mr. Bursak had admitted in a public meeting when we saw that graph of the needs of Tucson in housing, the great need for low-income housing, and then the great need for high-income housing, and the fact that, yeah, developers are going to go for that high-income housing, and then hopefully somewhere down the line, there's going to be some relief on current existing housing then maybe we'll drop the prices. Now that I call that like trickle down, and isn't really helping these people that need it so desperately now. And that is my big problem with this, is it isn't really addressing what people with great hearts hope to be addressed in this city. And it's more housing that's affordable for people, for working people, and unhoused people. It really isn't going to do that. But it does a lot of other good things for people with money, and for being feasible, which is developer talk for profitable for developers. And there was a former speaker who said, talking about market rate affordable, those are not the same. Affordable is very different than market rate. But I do commend the guy who was looking to build new construction for seniors. I think that will help a great deal in our town.
Thank you so much. Your
Anyway,
2 minutes
that's it.
is up. All right. I see no more hands up. I'll go ahead and entertain another motion.
Chair, I will go ahead and make a motion to close the public hearing.
Do I have a second?
Second. I'll second.
Okay. So we have a motion and a second to close the public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye. Any of those say nay?
This is the planning commission.
All right. The public hearing is now closed. Okay, general discussion from the commission.
Chairman Ortiz Pino, this is Commissioner Walzak.
Hello.
Hi, I'm joining you all from Mexico City, where I'm on work and have walked 24 miles in the last 3 days. It's been amazing. Since I was mentioned not directly by name this evening by one of the speakers, I want to just rebut the claim that was made that there could be a conflict of interest. I do not believe that there is a conflict of interest. The Menlo Park Neighborhood Association neighborhood plan process is ongoing. I am the current neighborhood president. And last week, I sent an email to the general membership of the Menlo Park neighborhood, which also includes members of the Barrio Sin Nombre neighborhood, that included links to the PDF maps that planning and zoning staff created. And I asked residents of Menlo Park to be sure and carefully look at which parcels are eligible under the CC tool for development. And there's very few. There's none in Barrio Sin Nombre. There are 2 very small parcels that are just outside of the current IID on Congress. And then the rest of the parcels in our neighborhood that would be eligible are along St. Mary's, which is already included in our neighborhood plan, which is draft for the type of development that's being considered under the CCC tool. So I wanted to just clarify that. And then I'd also like staff to please correct me if I got any of that wrong. Thank you.
I just want to clarify one thing real quickly. I know I think we talked about it in our presentation, but there was a lot of information. You cannot utilize the CCT within the infill incentive district. So the IID and that whole area that's down in Menlo Park or whatever, this tool would not apply to that. So I just want to make sure that's clear. And yes, I agree with what Commissioner Walzak said related to the maps.
Okay. Thank you for that. Okay, so opening up to the commission, I see Commissioner Zagir's hand up.
Hi, thank you. So I'm just going to make a comment here. So I really do think that the CCT would work in Tucson under slightly different conditions. I still am pretty adamant about building over 3 stories on collector streets. I think 2 stories should be the max, but 3 stories would be more profitable for developers. And I actually don't think you should be applying this to the collector streets. There's not that many properties. You can always add the collector streets later. And as Dan said, that most of this development is occurring along the major streets like Speedway and the arteries and stuff like that, which is good. There is adequate bus systems along there. Most of them have adequate bike lanes. This is where, people are complaining about all the Starbucks and drive-throughs. And considering that these are going to be smaller developments, I don't think that the parking issue, there will be a parking issue. Fourth Avenue area, there's a parking issue in the neighborhoods. Anywhere around the downtown issue, there's a parking issue. Somebody doesn't want to put a quarter in a parking meter and they park in front of somebody's house. Signage needs to be put up, like around the university area, that restricts parking to people who actually live there in front of their house, so a friend can come over and visit them. This is not addressed in the CCT. It says, well, and the height, I drove around and looked at the height of some buildings along the meter. They're 4 stories is pretty tall, and to say that you're eliminating asphalt, what you're creating is you're creating a heat block. Granted, it's not spread across a large area like a asphalt is, but it is a heat block. It will soak in the heat and then give it off at night. It will create a heat sink. I do have a problem with the heights that is proposed in this plan. There's oh yeah, and as far as the height goes along that is with the effect that the height of these will affect people who've actually spent money to put in their solar panels, or then that has not been taken in consideration as a shading effect. So as it stands now, I would, with some changes, and these aren't big changes. I mean, you can always add stuff to something, but it's hard to take it away after it's too late. So, and people saying, well, you're restricting us. Well, yes, okay. People look at us and they love coming here because of the small town feel. When you have is building us up like Phoenix, we're not Portland, Oregon, we're not Albuquerque. This is Tucson. We're special. And we should be considered our own entity and not compared with other entities. Anyway, so that's my comment. And as the CC stands as far as tonight, I'm personally not in favor of it as it stands now. I am in favor of developing more rental units and housings along major thoroughfares, but not on the collector streets. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Lane.
I just again like to reiterate the impressive amount of work you all have done. Thank you very much. Just listening to the presentation again and again makes it clear how complex and well thought out the plan is. And I had 2 comments. One, just a suggestion that as I think we've all seen, there's some slight imperfections that will be revealed as designers and developers use the tool. And so I would encourage the city to create a pathway to being able to make nimble, quick changes, again, as we learn through design. And the second thing is, one of the speakers tonight brought up the fact, again, that R2 zones are not included in this. I'm curious what it would take to just open it up to R2 zones now as part of the tool as we approve it. or recommend to approve it.
No. Yeah. Yeah, so just related to the R2, I mean, it is included, but in limited uh, eligibility, applicability, essentially. So it's included in those situations where it's between other eligible properties, when it's vacant, or when it is one of those split zone sites. So again, we were really trying to limit it to really the commercial areas and the commercial areas for redevelopment for this. Versus opening it all up with the R2. There's quite a bit of R2 that is along our corridor, our collectors. But again, it was that the feedback we heard about the encroachment into those kind of built out already residential areas. And that's the reason why. If, obviously the commission wanted to make a recommendation related to that, they're more than welcome to. And that would be recorded and sent forward to mayor and council.
I think that it would be, I mean, I am again a proponent of the city ensuring that there's a process for, like, there's going to be lots of properties like the one the man spoke about tonight where maybe it doesn't quite fit in with the definitions written in the CCT, but it would be a good candidate for this kind of development. And so rather than going through the arduous process of rezoning, can there be ooh that's nice. Can there be a shortened process for reviewing those individual properties?
There is a process for some flexibility where through a special exception process, you can potentially utilize, I think, some of the zones that aren't actually mentioned within this for that. So there is some flexibility related to that. It wouldn't necessarily, I don't believe. Yeah, but you would still have to have there's a number of criteria related to that for it. So there is some for flexibility. I don't know if it gets all the way to the allowance for some of those R2 parcels that you are talking about, but we have attempted to build that into the proposal.
All right, Commissioner Schwartz.
Thanks. I guess I first of all just want to add my thanks to the many who have stated it for staff's work on this. I feel like y'all have been exceedingly open, exceedingly fastidious about this, adapting this plan in ways that have reflected feedback that we've heard over these several meetings, and I'm grateful for that. I think my main overarching comment is fairly simple today, and that is just reminding folks that if nothing changes, nothing changes. I don't think there's anyone who's spoken this evening who would say that they were not concerned about the housing crisis in our region. And I think we as Planning Commission have a job that is necessarily forward thinking. It has to be something that envisions a city we actually want to have. Maybe not the ones that has the one that has the drawbacks that we now see, but one that we want to work towards, right? And we have the ability to shape our streets, to shape our neighborhoods. And I think if we ever do want to have a transit system that works for people, that works for everybody, that I would argue we desperately need in lieu of with the climate crisis like hanging over our heads, we need to make changes now that will allow for that to actually be functional. And I think this is a mild and measured one in the absolutely right direction. I agree that it's frustrating we can't, build mandatorily affordable housing, but I've heard staff say several times now, multiple people have, that we don't live in a state where that's possible. And so we have to do things like this. We have to do, creative solutions. And I appreciate developers and experts who've come and given their time today to weigh in about what it's really like to work in those margins. I know it's tough to accept change. It's tough to lose views that maybe you've had, but I'm just concerned that if we limit our central neighborhoods and our areas near corridors, good places for development that are near commercial resources and transit, we're never going to achieve our goals. And I think if those are your priorities, then I think it's important to I'm not sure that you should live in a central neighborhood. We already have the housing deficit. It's not a matter of choosing how many more people come here. It's just a matter of treating folks humanely. I will obviously be voting yes for this, and I would just urge the commission not to make any other tweaks that dilute it and risk cutting into those ever important margins we've been hearing about. Yeah, thanks.
Commissioner McCansey.
Thank you. Just a real quick comment. One of the characteristics of great neighborhoods in cities is that they attract they attract like young folks in to live in the rental units, and then they learn to love the neighborhood and they don't want to leave, so they move into like a two-family type situation, and then maybe they move into a single-family home. And I can envision this tool as being, maybe it's a small step, but it's a necessary step to creating neighborhoods like that in Tucson, where once you're there, you want to stay because it's a really cool neighborhood, or it's a fun neighborhood, or, whatever. And we don't have those kinds of options in neighborhoods in this city that at least that I'm aware of.
Have we lost sound?
I lost audio. I'm online. I can't hear him anymore.
Maybe somebody should call in.
I'll call Dan.
Kylie, I apologize if you can hear me. This is Anthony.
How about now? Are we on, Lauren? Is my
I
mic
can hear
live?
you now.
You can hear us now. Please continue, Mr. Commissioner Kenny.
Okay, thank you. So I'm in support of this. It's not perfect, but I think what we've done over the last couple of years and really in depth with us over the last few months, I think we understand what we're trying to do, and I think this is about as good as we can get right now. So one of the things that I would like to propose when we make a motion is that we put something in here with our recommendation that this tool gets revisited by staff in 2 years, because 2 years is about how long, a minimum, probably how long something's gonna take to actually get developed. And we can actually see how this is being used and done, and we can revisit it and see if changes need to be made. We can, we can do whatever we want. Maybe it's not broad enough, maybe it's too broad, maybe it needs to be more specific. We can make changes, and then we can revisit it then annually every year, which is something that I think you would already do, but it would be great to actually have it in writing. On the whole neighborhood notification, as you added that for large scale projects, which is great, but I kind of wanted to talk about that because I think this has gotten lost a bit in the complexity of everything over the last over the last few months. So it's going to be entirely project dependent. It's going to depend on the project and the property that the project is on. But a lot of the things that will utilize this tool could already develop on those properties without a rezoning. So I think the fact that there's no neighborhood notification or neighborhood meetings on anything other than large scale projects, well, those developments could already do a lot of what we're talking about here without that anyway. Also, I think that there's probably some large-scale projects that could already do it with underlying zoning that wouldn't require neighborhood notification. So if anything, we're actually, in some circumstances, depending on the project, adding more neighborhood notification for those projects because it not necessarily would have required it to begin with. Thank you also for looking into the historic properties stuff. I'm kind of, I guess, the only person who brings it up ever, but there are, you know, I think you said 170 something properties that could be impacted by this, and a lot of them are in the Miracle Mile Historic District. It would be great if when we make a motion, we can add an additional recommendation that the tool can't be used to delist a contributing property. And that would just kind of protect those 170 something properties. They could still be demolished if the developer chooses to use the underlying zoning, but for this tool, I'm not sure we want to incentivize people to, in certain circumstances, I think could incentivize people to actually demolish contributing properties because they're in the way of the rest of the property. So those are my kind of 2 points that I'd like to put to the commission when we make a motion. You know, a required review after 2 years and then 1 year after that going forward, and then can't delist contributing properties. So thank you.
Commissioner Young.
Yeah, thank you so much. Great presentation, great work by city staff. Certainly appreciate all the comments from folks who showed up tonight. I just think it's really important to, you know, reiterate some of the things that we've heard, and I'd like to add a few things as well. So, you know, the housing needs assessment just came out. It shows just how much housing we need in Tucson. And I think one of the things that gets lost in this conversation is the fact that this tool doesn't necessarily call for the development or mandate the development of more affordable housing. But when you build more market rate housing, it allows for more naturally affordable housing. It just creates more housing for folks that can afford it to buy up if they need to, and leaves naturally affordable housing available to more folks. And to that end, you know, poor folks generally are not showing up at these meetings. So I just think it's critical that we think about what's going on for folks who are really having trouble making ends meet, and you know, the housing that is needed. It also needs to be said, I think, that under the current paradigm that we live under, there is essentially no mechanism for affordable housing development aside from the low-income housing tax credit projects. And it's such a drop in the bucket. It just leaves a huge need for more affordable housing. But that's not the fault of the city. That's not really relevant, in my opinion, to this tool. We need other mechanisms from the federal government, the state level, a housing bond locally, something of that nature to really spur more affordable housing development that's truly affordable, that's tracked as such. Bill Mackey from the U of A presented a report about the zoning in Tucson to mayor and council. He's also presented to the Commission on Equitable Housing and Development for the city of Tucson. And his report is shocking, frankly, because the way that the zoning is in the city limits of Tucson, there are essentially no places to build any multifamily housing. And I asked him if that was true because I thought I misunderstood. And he said, no, in fact, there's essentially no place to build any kind of multifamily housing, high end, low end, affordable, what have you. So it's clear that the underlying zoning in Tucson needs to change just to have any kind of multifamily built. You know, I think there's a lot of developer bashing in Tucson, and I just think we need to remember who builds housing. Again, the government generally is not in the housing business. The only people that build housing are developers. And if they're telling us, we can't build housing of any type or multifamily, and these are the reasons, and these are the things that need to change, well, in order to get housing built, we need to change the zoning and change the paradigm that we live under so development can happen. I mean, that's the only way housing gets built. And until, there are huge changes at the federal level, that's what we're stuck with. So, I think, in my opinion, really, I don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good here. This is a really good change for the city of Tucson. Could it be better? Could it be, include more things for more folks? Absolutely. I think we could really, use a wholesale change in zoning, but that's not on the table. That's not going to happen. What we have today is a good change that, will allow for housing to be built in places that I think really can take that kind of housing. So I'm definitely going to vote for this. And I really think it's important to keep the folks who are unable to show up to these kinds of meetings, who, are really struggling to make ends meet, who just need housing. I think it's important to keep that in mind. And I don't think we should make any changes. I think we should move forward with it as is, and recommend that mayor and council adopt it. So thank you, everyone tonight, for your input and patience and thoughtful comments.
Thank you, Commissioner Young. Commissioner Walczak.
I don't have a lot to add because Commissioner Young just did a great job saying a lot of the things that I was thinking about and going to say. I'll just add again my appreciation for staff. This has been a lot of work, and my appreciation for the commissioners and for the public, for their patience and their understanding. And I think I'm just going to echo something that I've heard Commissioner McKenzie say the last couple of meetings that I haven't really appreciated because I'm new to all of this. But what I'm going to be upset about is that we've gone to all this trouble and wringing of hands and even insults, and we're not going to see this tool be used as quickly or in the ways that we all hope it will be used. And Commissioner McKenzie keeps bringing up, well, why aren't we tackling the underlying problem, which is revising the underlying zoning? The more I learn about this, and I went to a talk recently at the Druckmann Institute about I think it's a different report than the one Commissioner Young referenced, about how the new state bills, House bills, mandating, duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, et cetera, and ADUs could look in Tucson. And, hopefully this will make things easier for people to get through and permitted faster. But if it doesn't, and we start to see that, I would like us to think about the hard work of changing the underlying zoning, because as I'm learning, the developers will default to what is easiest and shortest to get through. And we know what that looks like because we see that in any new development getting built now. And we want to see different. We want to see something different. So for any elected officials or elected official staff that are listening to this conversation, I think this commission would like to think about the hard work of changing the underlying zoning at some point, if this doesn't pan out the way we hope it does. Thank you all.
Commissioner Zagier.
Hi, yes, and as always, Commissioner McKenzie, supporting historic areas and buildings. I appreciate everybody on the commission and the City of Tucson Planning and Zoning Department for putting this all together, and listening to the various comments tonight. My one last comment is, I understand that properties under 12 acres will not get neighborhood notification. I am wondering, is there any possible way is creating a site on the PDSD site that has projects that are being considered, where neighborhoods could go look to see what is actually going on, if there is going to be something to, so they can look at the plan and maybe contact the developer or contact the city to add comments or suggestions, since they know that neighborhood better. Or I did talk to Dan on the phone, weeks ago, as far as many places that are being developed, so they'll put a big old sign, Starbucks coming soon, is basically putting a sign out at the development site with a website where they can contact the developer and ask to speak to them. I know they don't have to, but I'm sure most developers want to know the feelings and appreciate feedback from the area they're going to put a building in. So I was wondering if it's possible to, have a developer put up a sign that says this is coming, but in the cases of where the sites are under 12 acres. Thank you.
Right. Seems like everybody has had their piece. I wanted to say one short thing that I hadn't quite heard yet this evening, which is that when we incentivize development in the city, densifying the inner city, we don't have to sprawl out anymore. And that protects our environment, the Sonoran Desert. It eliminates further expansion of the urban heat island effect. And these are all really good things that should be part of the conversation. And I want to say that that's specifically to my representative Ward 3 council member, who was instrumental in getting the Sonoran Conservation Plan through, and as a conservationist, but may not be against, may be against this. So a specific dig to him. With that said, that's my piece. And do we have a motion?
Can I make one statement real quick?
Sure.
Just because I really want to appreciate staff here. You guys have done, Dan, I was joking a moment ago saying you deserve a round of applause for giving this presentation 3 times over now. So thank you for doing it and doing it with grace. But something that really resonated with me at the last hearing was something that one of the speakers said, that was a discussion of we're working within the margins, and our line of work. Too many times in this city do you hear that the margin snaps the whole project. Like, I think of a great project in a really reasonable space like Broadway and Rosemont, where it was going to solve a really large problem. And what happened is it went through rezoning and it got dwindled down to a position of which that deal could not pencil. And now we are left with a vacant lot, no housing, no mixed use development at a space that really made sense. And so how do we start to grapple with these challenges that are now exacerbated with costs of development, labor shortages, et cetera, and really figure out how to address zoning? And I agree with Commissioner McCancy is, there's notion in the comments of this definition of insanity, and we are insane of talking about this constantly and never fixing it. And the real problem is the zoning code, and the only way we could truly fix it is by full reform. And this is that in a small marginal scale to see how it works and pencils out. So I do fully support this, and I do support the amendments that staff has made to this position. I do support Commissioner Kenny's recommendation to codify in the 2-year review. I know staff has already looked at that, but I do think that is an important thing, so that there is something on the books so we can reevaluate to see how this is doing, because I personally believe this is not enough. This is not what the city needs to get where we want to be and where we actually have to be to meet the deficit of where we're doing. So I think it's a great opportunity for us to start looking at economies of scale within the margins, and it's really important. So with that, if nobody has anything else, I would go ahead and make a recommendation to, sorry, let me back this up. I will go ahead and make a motion to recommend approval of the proposed community corridor tool with added language to suggest a 2-year review by staff, so we can really evaluate the pros and cons and really keep an open mind to this as we move forward in the process. I would also ask that we add language to suggest that in these contributing properties that the properties aren't delisted through the CCT there, because I think there is a historical component that is important to this. But with that said, I would also like us to look at recommending some added flexibility to this to, you know, those projects that are so far in the margins that we're not quite there with the CCT and we need a little bit more, or something else doesn't pan out, that we should create a process by way of a special exception or something to allow the opportunity for these sites that are unknown or where we aren't sure it will take us, that there is a process. And I think that we've talked about it in a special exception format, et cetera. So, and then added to that, I also would like to make the motion that we approve the electric vehicle supply equipment unified code development amendment to mayor and council. Sorry, long-winded motion there, but I felt it was necessary to break it up so it didn't get wonky with the electric vehicles stuff.
Okay. I think Mr. Kinney has, Commissioner Kinney has a small addition.
Can I make a friendly amendment? Is that how it works? Just to clarify on the revisiting, it would be in 2 years and then every year thereafter. Do you accept that? You?
Can't we make that decision at the 2-year point?
I would support a 2-year review. I don't know if every year after that, but let's.
Okay. I mean, we can, like Commissioner Lane said, I think we can probably figure that out in 2 years. So, okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Then my friendly amendment is gone. I don't know how, whatever. Yeah.
Did we have a second on Commissioner Wellett's motion?
Not yet. There appears to be some discussion.
I think we have to have a second if you want to have a friendly amendment, but that friendly amendment got withdrawn, right?
That's correct.
Okay. So she still needs a second?
Yes.
Second.
Do we have any further discussion on the motion at hand? Hearing none, go ahead and have a roll call on this one. Would staff please call roll call for approval?
Certainly. Chair Ortiz-Pino,
Aye.
Vice Chair Kinney,
Aye.
Commissioner Lampo, Commissioner Lane,
Aye.
Commissioner McCansey,
Aye.
Commissioner Schwartz,
Aye.
Commissioner Small,
Aye.
Commissioner Walzak,
Aye.
Commissioner Willett,
Aye.
Commissioner Young,
Aye.
Commissioner Zagier.
Aye.
We have a unanimous vote. Motion passes unanimously. Okay, let's move on quickly here. Next item is PDSE staff announcements.
No announcements. Dan will give an overview of upcoming items. Thank you all for the work tonight. This is a really great meeting and I think a really productive hearing in terms of hearing from a broad cross-section of our community. So thank you, but your work is not done because we have a lot ahead. So Dan will talk about that on the next item.
Thank you. Future agenda items, item 5.
Yeah, so yes, thank you, Commission. So yeah, so now that we've reviewed the CCT, we have Plan Tucson coming to you in the near future. We have 2 public hearings coming up within the next 3 weeks or so. So March 12th will be the first of the 2 public hearings we currently have scheduled. That'll be held at the Ward 2 office. We are working on getting a setup for there, so it'll be a hybrid meeting for that. And then we have a second public hearing for that the week following, which is I believe on the 19th And that one will be here in the mayor and council chambers, also hybrid. So a lot of great things coming up. We will be posting the materials for that with some revisions to the draft, which are currently being finalized about a week ahead of time prior to that public hearing.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Item number 6, call to the audience. I see we have 40 participants online still, nobody inside, but if you would like to offer the public an opportunity to speak on any subject not listed on the agenda this evening as a public hearing, if anyone would like to speak, they can please raise their hand. Seeing none, I'd like to call to adjourn.
It's called.
Thank you all so much. Great work, guys.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you again for all your work, commission members, on this item over 3 meetings. Really appreciate all the time you have put into very thoughtful review of this item. Thank you.